The final pen stroke felt less like an ending and more like a precipice. Alastair Finch, a man whose signature authorized the movement of billions, stared at the crisp adoption certificate. It felt heavier than any stock portfolio. He was officially a father. Her name was Eva, a small, quiet 7-year-old with eyes the color of a stormy sea, eyes that seemed to hold the world's sorrows and its resilience all at once. His penthouse, a sterile expanse of glass and steel overlooking the city, suddenly felt wrong, too large and too cold for someone so small. He led her by her tiny hand to the room he'd had prepared. It was a princess's fantasy, all pinks and whites, with a canopied bed and a mountain of stuffed animals. Eva said nothing, her gaze sweeping over the extravagance with a detached curiosity that unnerved him. She was carrying a single, tattered teddy bear, its button eyes dangling by threads. As she stepped over the threshold, her worn-out sneaker caught on the edge of a thick Persian rug. She stumbled forward, landing on her hands and knees. Alastair rushed to help her up. "Careful, now!" He gently took her arm to lift her, and as he did, the long sleeve of her faded cardigan rode up past her wrist. And then he saw it. A pale, jagged scar, shaped uncannily, like a lightning fork, branching out in delicate silvery lines against her tender skin. Alastair froze. The air left his lungs in a silent, violent rush. His grip on her arm went slack, his mind a maelstrom of white noise. He instinctively clutched his own right wrist, the fabric of his bespoke suit suddenly feeling paper-thin against the identical, ghostly pattern etched into his own skin. Eva looked up at him, her brow furrowed with concern. "Are you okay, Mr. Finch?" she whispered, her voice barely a tremor. He couldn't answer. The world had tilted on its axis, and the carefully constructed fortress of his life had just been leveled by a 7-year-old girl, and a scar he thought was uniquely his own. His silence stretched, becoming a tangible thing in the opulent room. He was a man who commanded boardrooms with an iron will, who could dissect a hostile takeover in his sleep, yet the innocent question from this child had rendered him utterly mute. He was back there, in the chaos of smoke and screaming, the searing heat, the splintering of wood. It was a memory he had spent a fortune on therapists to bury, a nightmare he hadn't allowed to surface in over 2 decades. But Eva's scar was a key, unlocking the vault with terrifying ease. He finally managed a jerky nod, forcing his hand away from his own wrist. He swallowed, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. "I'm fine, Eva," he said, his voice a rough, unfamiliar rasp. "Just surprised you took a tumble. Are you hurt?" He deflected, a skill honed in 1,000 negotiations. She shook her head, pulling her sleeve back down with a practiced motion, as if hiding the mark was second nature. The gesture sent another shock wave through him. He did the same thing, constantly adjusting his cuff, wearing long-sleeved shirts, even in the height of summer, a subconscious tick to hide the one part of his past that couldn't be erased or bought out. He retreated a step, creating distance, needing space to breathe. The room, designed to be a welcoming paradise, now felt like a cage. The pastel colors were cloying. The stuffed animals seemed to be watching him with their dead glass eyes. He had vetted Eva's file meticulously, or so he thought. St. Jude's Home for Children, abandoned at a church doorstep as an infant. No known relatives. Health good, save for minor asthma. Scars, one noted on left knee from a fall. Nothing about her wrist. Was it an oversight, or was it deliberately omitted? The thought was a cold sliver of ice in his gut. He had wanted a child to fill the echoing void of his life, a legacy beyond Finch Enterprises. He had chosen Eva because she was quiet, because she didn't try to charm him like the other children. She had looked at him not as a savior or a walking wallet, but with a solemn, unnerving appraisal, as if she were the one conducting the interview. That directness, that lack of artifice, had drawn him in. Now he wondered what else lay hidden beneath that quiet exterior. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "Well, this is your room," he said, his gesture stiff and awkward. "You can do whatever you want with it. If you don't like the color, we can have it repainted tomorrow." He was talking about paint. A scar that mirrored his own was burning under his skin, a brand that tied him to this small stranger in a way he couldn't comprehend, and he was talking about paint. Ava simply nodded, clutching her tattered bear tighter. She walked over to the mountain of new toys, ignoring them completely, and sat on the edge of the enormous bed, her feet dangling inches from the floor. She looked so fragile, so out of place, a dandelion seed that had drifted into a sterile laboratory. Alistair stood in the doorway, a ghost in his own home. He had intended to give her a new life, a world of opportunity and comfort he had never known. Instead, she had brought the one thing he had spent his entire life trying to escape, his past. The silence returned, no longer just awkward, but heavy with unspoken questions. He watched her, this little girl with his eyes and his scar, and felt a terrifying, unfamiliar emotion stir within him. It wasn't just responsibility or pity. It was fear. Fear of what this meant, and a deeper, more profound fear that for the first time in his adult life, he was utterly, terrifyingly not in control. That night, sleep was a foreign country Alistair couldn't find a visa for. He sat in his study, a cavernous room lined with first edition books he'd never read, a glass of untouched Macallan 1926, sweating onto a coaster beside him. The city lights glittered below, a sprawling galaxy of lives he couldn't care less about. His entire focus was condensed into the mystery that now slept down the hall. He had pulled up Eva's file on his holographic desk display. The information was sparse, maddeningly so. Baby Jane Doe, discovered 6:15 a.m., April 12th, 18 years ago, on the steps of St. Swithin's Church. Estimated age, 6 months. No identifying marks or items other than a standard issue cotton blanket. Estimated age, 6 months. That would place her birth around October of the previous year. He ran the dates, his mind a frantic calculator. The fire. The fire was in early April. The timing was too close to be a coincidence. But how? The official report had been clear. 2 fatalities. His parents. He, Alistair, then 5 years old, was the sole survivor, pulled from the wreckage by a firefighter. He remembered the man's soot-stained face, the kindness in his eyes amidst the inferno. He remembered being bundled into an ambulance, the acrid smell of smoke clinging to his hair. His wrist had been sliced open by a shard of glass from a shattering window. He remembered the medic wrapping it, the sharp sting of antiseptic. He had never considered there was anyone else. He was the only one. He had built his entire identity on that grim fact. The lone survivor. The boy from the ashes who built an empire. It was his narrative, his armor. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking a lonely rhythm. He needed more than the sanitized file from the adoption agency. He needed the source. He placed a call. It was well past 2 a.m., but he knew the man on the other end wouldn't mind. "Harris," he said, his voice low, "I have a job for you. Discretion is paramount." Gavin Harris was the best private investigator money could buy, a man who moved through the city's underbelly and its high-rises with equal ghost-like ease. "Name it, Mr. Finch." "A child, Ava, from St. Jude's. I want to know everything, not the official story, the real one, where she came from, who left her at that church. I want the name of every nurse, every priest, every janitor who was there that morning. I want to know about a scar on her right wrist, a jagged one. Find out how she got it." "St. Jude's," Harris repeated, a hint of curiosity in his professional tone. "Isn't that the—" "Yes. The adoption was finalized today. She's here." A pause. Even the unflappable Harris seemed to process the implications. "I'll start at the church, St. Swithin's. Old records can be tricky. But for you, nothing's impossible. You'll have something by morning." Alistair disconnected, the silence of the study pressing in on him again. He walked to the window, looking down at the sleeping city. He had always seen it as a thing to be conquered, a complex machine he had mastered. Now it felt like a labyrinth, hiding a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. He thought of Eva, alone in her new, cavernous room. Was she scared? He hadn't even properly tucked her in. He'd been too shaken, too lost in his own rediscovered trauma. The realization landed with the force of a physical blow. He was failing. Already, on day one, he was a failure as a father. He walked softly down the marble hallway, the sound of his bare feet a whisper against the cold stone. He pushed her door open a crack. A small nightlight, in the shape of a star, cast a warm, golden glow. Eva was curled in the very center of the massive bed, a tiny island in a sea of white duvet. Her tattered bear was clutched to her chest. Her breathing was soft and even. As he watched, she shifted in her sleep, her small hand flopping onto the pillow. The sleeve of her pajamas had ridden up. In the soft light of the star, he could just make out the faint silvery lines on her wrist. His scar, their scar. He felt a powerful protective surge, so intense it made him dizzy. It was a feeling that went deeper than the legal documents, deeper than his planned-out intentions of fatherhood. It was primal. It was a sense of connection that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. He quietly pulled the door closed, his resolve hardening into something cold and sharp. He would find the truth. He would tear down every wall, bribe every official, and turn over every stone in this city until he understood how this little girl, this stranger, wore a piece of his own history on her skin. He wasn't just a billionaire adopting an orphan anymore. He was a man chasing a ghost, and he wouldn't stop until he caught it. The first few days were a stilted, awkward dance. Alistair, accustomed to a life scheduled in 5-minute increments, found himself adrift in the unstructured sea of a child's day. His housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a warm, no-nonsense woman who had been with him for years, tried to bridge the gap. She made pancakes shaped like animals, which Ava regarded with quiet solemnity before methodically eating the ears off a bear. She showed Eva the indoor pool, the home theater, the small library Alistair had stocked with every classic children's book. Eva walked through it all like a tourist in a foreign land, polite and observant, but never truly present. Her connection was reserved for her tattered bear, which she named Barnaby, and for the small, sun-drenched window seat in the library that overlooked a patch of Central Park. She would sit there for hours, not reading, just watching the world go by. Alistair tried to engage her. He brought out a 1,000-piece puzzle of a medieval castle. "I used to love these," he said, his attempt at casualness sounding forced even to his own ears. Eva picked up a single piece, a featureless patch of blue sky, and held it for a moment before placing it back in the box. "It's nice," she said, and wandered back to her window seat. He felt a familiar sting of failure, the same feeling he'd had as a boy at the group home when he was never chosen for the weekend family visits. He was trying to connect the only way he knew how, by offering things: puzzles, movies, toys, an endless parade of material possessions. He was treating her like a business acquisition, assuming the right assets would guarantee success. But she wasn't a company. She was a child, and she was grieving. Grieving the only life she had ever known at St. Jude's, the familiar faces of the other children, the predictable rhythm of the institutional day. His penthouse wasn't a home to her. It was a gilded cage, and he was her captor. The realization was a bitter pill. He was so used to being the solution to every problem that he didn't know how to handle a problem that didn't have a price tag. He couldn't just write a check to fix her sadness. On the third day, Harris called. "I have something," the investigator's voice crackled through the secure line. "It's not much. St. Swithin's records from that year are a mess. Water damage in the rectory basement. But I found a name. Father Michael, the priest, who found her. He's retired now, living in a small parish upstate. And I spoke to a night watchman. Old guy, memory's a bit fuzzy, but he remembers that morning. He said something odd. He said he saw a woman running away from the church just before dawn. He didn't get a good look at her, just that she was crying. A woman. It was the first tangible lead, the first crack in the wall of anonymity. "What about the scar?" Alistair pressed. "Nothing. No hospital records for a Jane Doe infant with that kind of injury around that time. I checked every emergency room in a 50-mile radius. It's possible it was treated off the books, or that it wasn't as severe then. A cut on a baby might not have seemed major enough to warrant a full report if someone was trying to stay hidden." Frustration coiled in Alistair's stomach. It was like trying to grasp smoke. "Keep digging, Harris. Find this Father Michael. Talk to him, and see if you can get a sketch artist to work with the watchman. Any detail, no matter how small." He hung up and found his gaze drawn towards the library. He could see Eva in her window seat, her small silhouette framed by the morning light. He had to try something different. He walked into the library, not with a toy or a proposal for an activity, but with just himself. He sat in the armchair opposite her window seat. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of city traffic. Finally, he broke the silence. "What do you see out there?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Eva didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the park. "A man is walking his dog," she said. "It's a golden retriever. The dog likes to chase squirrels, but the man always pulls him back. There's a lady on the bench reading a book. She has a red coat." She described the scene with a simple, unadorned clarity. She wasn't interpreting it, just observing it. "What do you think the lady is reading?" Alistair asked, leaning forward slightly. Eva considered this for a moment. "A story about a faraway place. A place with castles and dragons. She looks like she wants to be somewhere else." The insight was so sharp, so unexpectedly poignant, it took Alistair's breath away. He had seen a woman in a red coat. Ava had seen a soul's yearning for escape. In that moment, he understood. He had been trying to fill her world with noise, with things, when all she wanted was quiet. All she wanted was to be seen. "I used to do that," he said, the admission surprising him. "When I was a boy, I'd sit and watch people and make up stories about their lives." Eva finally turned her head and looked at him. Her stormy eyes held his, and for the first time he didn't see a stranger. He saw a flicker of recognition, a shared spark of a lonely childhood. "Did you live in a big house like this?" she asked. The question was a pinprick to the balloon of his carefully constructed life. "No," he said, the word tasting of ash. "No, I didn't. I lived in a place with a lot of other kids. A place like St. Jude's." Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. A silent understanding passed between them, a bridge built across the chasm of their different lives, forged from the common material of a lost childhood. She didn't ask any more questions. She didn't need to. She simply turned back to the window, but she shifted slightly, her small body angled just a little more towards him. It was a small gesture, almost nothing, but to Alistair it felt like a seismic shift. The puzzle of Eva was not one of pieces to be fit together, but of layers to be gently peeled back. And he realized, with a dawning sense of hope, that perhaps the key wasn't in his past, in the fire and the scar, but right here, in the quiet observation of a man walking his dog in the park. Alistair began to change his approach. He canceled 3/4 of his meetings, delegating with a ruthlessness that sent shock waves through his executive board. He started marking Ava in his calendar, blocking out entire afternoons. Their time together remained quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet now, not a strained one. He would sit and read financial reports in the armchair while she watched the world from her window seat. Sometimes she would ask a question. "Why are the leaves turning yellow?" "It's called autumn," he'd explain, putting down his tablet. "The trees are getting ready to sleep for the winter." He found himself researching chlorophyll and photosynthesis, wanting to give her the right answers, the full answers. He discovered a patience he never knew he possessed. One afternoon, she turned from the window and said, "I miss the rain." It was a simple statement, but it held a world of meaning. The penthouse was climate-controlled, a perfectly regulated environment sealed off from the elements. He looked at her small, serious face and made a decision. "Come on," he said, standing up. "Let's go find some." He took her to the conservatory on the top floor, a massive glass dome he had built to house exotic plants, but rarely visited. He keyed a command into the environmental controls, and a moment later a soft mist began to fall from the ceiling, coalescing into a gentle, artificial rain. It pattered on the broad leaves of the palm trees and giant ferns, filling the air with the scent of damp earth and blossoms. Ava's face lit up with a genuine, unreserved smile. It was the first one he had ever seen, and it was like watching the sun rise. She stepped into the center of the room, her face turned up to the synthetic shower, and giggled. The sound was a melody he hadn't known his sterile world was missing. She twirled, her arms outstretched, her faded cardigan becoming dark with moisture. Alistair stood and watched, a lump forming in his throat. This was what she wanted. Not toys, not clothes, just the simple, sensory experience of rain on her skin. He had the power to create rain indoors, but he had needed a 7-year-old to remind him of the simple joy of it. He stepped forward and held out his hand. The manufactured raindrops cooled his skin. He felt the tension in his shoulders, a knot he'd been carrying for 20 years, begin to dissolve. He wasn't Mr. Finch, CEO of Finch Enterprises, in that moment. He was just a man, standing in the rain with a little girl who was, slowly but surely, teaching him how to live again. The next day, Harris called again. His voice was different, tense. "I found him, Father Michael. He's in a hospice, pancreatic cancer. The doctors say he only has a few weeks." A cold dread washed over Alistair. "Did you talk to him?" "Yes. He remembers that morning very clearly. He says it's one of his biggest regrets." Harris paused. "Mr. Finch, he said the woman who left the baby. She left a note." Alistair's heart hammered against his ribs. "A note?" The file said there was nothing. The file was wrong. Or it was made to be wrong. Father Michael kept it. He said he felt it was too personal to hand over to the authorities. He saw it as a confession, a sacred trust. "What did it say, Harris?" "He wouldn't tell me. He said he would only give it to the child, or to the child's family, if they ever came looking. He said the woman made him promise." "Where is he?" Alistair demanded, his mind racing. A note, a direct link to the past. "St. Anselm's Hospice, about 2 hours north of the city. I'm on my way." He ended the call and went to find Eva. She was in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Gable make cookies, which mostly involved her putting sprinkles on everything, including the countertop. "Eva," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "we need to take a little trip. There's someone I think you should meet." She looked up at him, her face dusted with flour, her stormy eyes questioning. She trusted him now. He could see it. The thought was both a comfort and a heavy weight. He was about to take her to meet a dying man, to unearth a past that could shatter the fragile peace they were just beginning to build. He hoped, with a desperation that was entirely new to him, that he was doing the right thing. The drive upstate was a blur of autumn foliage. Alistair drove himself, the sleek Maybach feeling cumbersome and out of place on the winding country roads. Eva sat in the back, silent for the first hour, watching the city fall away and be replaced by trees of fiery red and gold. "Barnaby thinks the trees are on fire," she said suddenly, holding up her tattered bear. Alistair glanced at her in the rear-view mirror. "They do look a bit like that," he agreed, "but it's just their way of getting ready for a long nap." "Like you?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "Like me?" "You don't sleep very much," she stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple fact. "I hear you walking around at night." He hadn't realized she was aware of his nocturnal restlessness. He felt a pang of guilt that his own anxieties were somehow bleeding into her world. "My mind is busy," he said, which was the truest thing he could say without explaining the full weight of his obsession. Sometimes it's hard to make it be quiet. "You should tell it a story," Eva suggested sagely. "That's what Miss Clara at St. Jude's did when we couldn't sleep. She told us stories about sleepy bunnies who found their way home." He managed a small smile. The simple, profound wisdom of a child. Tell the monster a story until it falls asleep. Maybe she was right. St. Anselm's Hospice was a quiet, unassuming building, nestled amongst a grove of ancient oak trees. It smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. A nurse led them to a private room at the end of a long, sunlit corridor. Father Michael was impossibly frail, a bird-like man lost in a sea of white pillows. A thin tube ran to his nose, and his skin was the color of old parchment. But his eyes, when they opened to look at them, were startlingly clear and lucid. They fixed on Ava, and a look of profound, heart-wrenching sadness passed over his face. "You came," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "I prayed you would." Alistair stood back, letting Ava approach the bed. She did so without fear, her small hand reaching out to touch the old man's withered one. "Hello," she said softly. "I'm Ava." "I know who you are, my child," Father Michael rasped, a tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. "I have thought of you every day for 7 years." He shifted his gaze to Alistair. "And you must be the one who has finally given her a home." Alistair nodded, unable to speak. "I am sorry for the deception," the priest continued, his breathing shallow. "The official record, I altered it. The woman, the mother. She was so frightened. She made me promise. She said powerful people were looking for her, for the child. She said a blank file was the only way to keep her safe. Powerful people." The words hung in the air, charged with menace. This was more than a desperate mother abandoning her child. This was something else entirely. "The note," Alistair said, his voice tight. "You have a note." Father Michael nodded weakly, gesturing to a small, worn wooden box on his bedside table. "It is in there. I have kept it all this time. My confession, my burden." Alistair retrieved the box. It was surprisingly light. He brought it to the bedside. The priest looked at Ava, his eyes full of apology. "Your mother loved you very much, Ava. You must never doubt that. Everything she did to protect you." He squeezed Ava's hand one last time. "Be happy, little one. That is all she would have wanted." His eyes drifted closed, and his breathing seemed to settle into a deeper, more peaceful rhythm. The nurse quietly ushered them out, saying he needed his rest. Back in the car, the wooden box sat on the passenger seat between them. It felt like a bomb. Alistair looked at Eva. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. She had just met a dying man who held a key to her entire existence, and she showed no outward sign of turmoil. Her resilience was a constant source of awe to him. "Do you want to open it?" he asked gently. She looked at the box, then at him. "Are you my family now?" she asked, her voice very small. The question was a direct hit to his heart. It wasn't about the note, or the mystery woman, or the powerful people. It was about right now, about him, about them. "Yes, Ava," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am." She nodded, a single decisive gesture. "Then you should open it. We'll read it together." He pulled the car over to the side of the road, beneath the canopy of the flaming autumn trees. With trembling hands, he lifted the lid of the wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. He carefully picked it up. The handwriting was frantic, looping, the ink slightly smeared, as if by tears. He began to read aloud, his voice low and steady, as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet country road. "To whoever finds my daughter," it began. "Her name is not Jane. Her name is Eliana. I cannot keep her. They are hunting me. They took my husband from me, and they will take her too, if they find us. My brother tried to help us escape, but they found him. There was a fire. Oh, God, the fire. I thought everyone was gone, but I found her, my sweet Eliana, in the arms of a firefighter, alive. I took her and ran. I have been running ever since. I have no money, no one to turn to. Leaving her is the only way to save her. The man who is hunting us, his name is Marcus Thorne. He was my husband's business partner. He is a monster. He will stop at nothing. Please keep her safe. Don't let him find her. She has a birthmark, a small star, on the back of her neck. It is the only way I would ever be able to prove she is mine. And she has a scar on her wrist from the glass in the fire, just like her brother, Alistair. The world stopped. The sound of the blood roaring in Alistair's ears was deafening. He read the last words again and again, the ink blurring through his own tears. Just like her brother, Alistair, Ava. Eliana was not a stranger. She was not a coincidence. She was his sister, his little sister, who he thought had perished in the fire with his parents. The sole survivor narrative, the bedrock of his entire life, was a lie. He hadn't been the only one. He looked at Ava, truly looked at her, and saw it for the first time. The shape of her eyes, the stubborn set of her chin, the faint echo of his own mother's face. How had he been so blind? Ava looked back at him, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she watched the tears stream down his face. "What is it?" she whispered. "What did it say?" He reached out and gently brushed the hair from the back of her neck. And there it was. Faint, but unmistakable. A tiny star-shaped birthmark. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation and a love so fierce it hurt. He buried his face in her hair, the scent of her shampoo and the faint, dusty smell of her old bear filling his senses. "I found you," he sobbed, the words muffled against her shoulder. "Ellie, I found you." She was stiff in his embrace for a moment, confused, and then her small arms wrapped around his neck, holding on tight. She didn't understand, not yet, but she understood his pain, his overwhelming relief. She was a child, accustomed to comforting the sorrows of others. They stayed like that for a long time. Two broken pieces of a family, clinging to each other on the side of a forgotten road as the autumn leaves fell around them like silent, colorful tears. The puzzle was complete, and the picture it formed was both more beautiful and more terrifying than he could ever have imagined. The name Marcus Thorne echoed in Alistair's mind, a discordant note in the symphony of his reunion. He knew the name. Thorne Industries was a major competitor, a ruthless conglomerate known for its aggressive, borderline illegal business practices. He had crossed paths with Marcus Thorne at galas and board meetings. The man was charming, silver-haired, with the cold, predatory eyes of a shark. The idea that this man was connected to the death of his parents and the disappearance of his sister was almost inconceivable. His father, Robert Finch, had been a brilliant but gentle man, an engineer with a small, innovative tech firm. Alistair had always been told the fire was a tragic accident, a faulty wire in their modest suburban home. Now that story was unraveling, revealing a far more sinister plot beneath. He held his sister, Eliana, he had to get used to the name, at arm's length. He needed to explain, but where to even begin? How do you tell a 7-year-old that her entire life has been a lie, constructed to protect her from a monster? "Ava," he began, his voice still shaky. "The note. It was from your mother. Our mother." He watched her face carefully, saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Our mother?" she repeated. "You and me? We have the same one?" "Yes," he said, his heart aching. "Her name was Eleanor, and our father's name was Robert. You were just a baby when there was an accident, a fire. I was there too." I was 5 years old. He gently took her right hand and laid it next to his own, aligning their wrists. He traced the jagged lightning bolt on her skin, then his. We both got these scars that night, from the same broken window. Her eyes widened as she looked from her scar to his, the reality of the physical proof dawning on her. I thought... Everyone told me I was alone, she whispered. So did I, he said, his voice thick. I thought I was the only one who made it out. But our mother saved you. She took you and ran because she was afraid of a bad man. She left you at the church because she thought it was the only way to keep you hidden and safe. She loved you so much, Ellie. Your name, your real name, is Eliana. Eliana. She tested the name on her tongue, a soft, tentative whisper. Eliana. She looked up at him, 1,000 questions in her stormy eyes, but the one she asked was the simplest, the most important. So you're not just a Mr. Finch anymore? No, he said, a genuine watery smile breaking through his tears. I'm Alistair, your brother. The word felt foreign, and yet perfectly right. Brother. It was a title that meant more than CEO, more than billionaire. It was a connection forged in fire and loss, rediscovered by fate. The journey back to the city was different. A comfortable silence filled the car, but it was charged with a new energy. Eliana, Ava felt like a name for a different child now, kept touching her scar, then looking at him, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across her face. She had a brother. She had a name. She had a history. Back at the penthouse, the first thing Alistair did was call Gavin Harris. Marcus Thorne, he said, the name like venom on his tongue. I want everything you can find on him. I want to know what he had for breakfast. I want to know every deal he ever made, especially the ones with a man named Robert Finch 22 years ago. I want you to dig so deep you hit magma. Spare no expense. Thorne, Harris said, his voice tight with surprise. This just went to a whole new level, Mr. Finch. You have no idea, Alistair replied, his voice deadly calm. He took my family. I'm going to take his empire. His next call was to Mrs. Gable. We'll be redecorating Miss Eliana's room, he said. Get rid of the pink. I want something that feels like a sunrise. Golds and yellows and soft blues. And I want a wall, a big one, cleared for pictures. He spent the rest of the evening with his sister. He dug out a dusty, forgotten box from the back of a storage closet, the only one he had kept from his childhood. Inside were a few faded photographs. He showed them to her. There was their father, Robert, a tall man with kind eyes and a goofy grin, holding a much younger Alistair on his shoulders. And there was their mother, Eleanor, her hair the same shade as Eliana's, laughing as she held a tiny swaddled bundle. That's you, Alistair whispered, pointing to the baby. That's Eliana. She traced the face of the woman in the photograph, her mother, with a small reverent finger. She's beautiful, she said softly. For the first time, Eliana cried. Not loud, racking sobs, but silent, heartfelt tears. Tears for the parents she never knew, for the mother who had given her up to save her. Alistair held her, letting her grieve, feeling his own long-suppressed sorrow finally finding a release. They were two orphans who had just discovered they weren't orphans at all. They were survivors. They were family. That night he tucked her into bed. He sat on the edge of the mattress, the princess canopy seeming absurd now. Tell me a story, she murmured, her eyes heavy with sleep and emotion. A story about the sleepy bunnies. Alistair hesitated. He didn't know any stories about bunnies. He knew about hostile takeovers and market fluctuations. But he looked at his sister's trusting face, and he began to speak, his voice low and soothing. "Once upon a time," he started, "there were two little bunnies, a brother and a sister. They lived in a warm, happy burrow with their mother and father. But one day, a big, scary storm came, and they got lost. They were separated. The brother bunny thought he was all alone in the world, and the sister bunny thought she was all alone too. They were both very sad for a long, long time. The brother bunny built a big, strong burrow, the biggest in the whole forest, but it always felt empty. The sister bunny was safe in a new place, but she always felt like a piece of her was missing. But then one day, after many years, the brother bunny found a little map, and it led him right back to his sister. He smoothed the hair back from her forehead, and they were never alone again. She was asleep, a faint smile on her lips. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, something he had never imagined doing. The gesture was so natural, so right. He stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. The rage at Marcus Thorne was a cold, hard stone in his chest. But for the first time, it wasn't a blind, all-consuming rage. It was focused. It was purposeful. He wasn't just avenging the past anymore. He was protecting the future. He was protecting his sister. The battle was just beginning, but Alistair Finch finally knew what he was fighting for. The war against Marcus Thorne was not fought in boardrooms with PowerPoints and projections, but in the shadowy world of data retrieval and human intelligence. Gavin Harris and his team worked around the clock, and the information began to flow, a torrent of digital ghosts and long-buried secrets. The picture that emerged was chillingly clear. Robert Finch had developed a revolutionary new type of microprocessing technology. He had brought his business partner, Marcus Thorne, in for capital and manufacturing connections. But Thorne, seeing the technology's true, world-changing potential, had wanted it all. He had tried to force Robert into a buyout for a pittance. When Robert refused, Thorne had arranged the accident. The fire hadn't been caused by faulty wiring. It was arson, expertly staged to look accidental. The goal was to eliminate Robert and his wife and seize the patents in the ensuing corporate chaos. Alistair, the 5-year-old boy, was never meant to survive. Eliana, the infant, Thorne hadn't even known existed. Their mother, Eleanor, must have pieced it together in the horrific aftermath. Realizing Thorne would stop at nothing, she had grabbed her daughter and fled into the night, becoming a ghost to save her child's life. Every new piece of information fueled the icy fire of Alistair's rage. He sat in his study, the data streaming across his holographic displays, and plotted Thorne's destruction not with emotion, but with the cold, surgical precision of a master strategist. He would not confront Thorne with the accusations directly. A man like that would have layers of deniability. No, he would dismantle him piece by piece, starting with his business. While this silent war waged, life in the penthouse was transforming. The princess room was gone, replaced by a cheerful haven of yellow and blue. The wall of photos began to fill up, not just the old, faded ones, but new ones. Alistair and Eliana at the zoo. Eliana, covered in mud, after her first attempt at gardening in the conservatory. Both of them with flour on their noses, holding up a slightly burnt batch of cookies. Laughter, a sound once alien in the marble halls, was now a common occurrence. Eliana was blossoming. The quiet, solemn child was being replaced by a curious, bright, and sometimes mischievous little girl. She was fiercely intelligent, devouring the books in the library and peppering Alistair with questions about everything from black holes to the stock market. He found in her a mind that was uncannily like his own. He was not just her brother and protector. He was becoming her teacher, her friend, her entire world. And she, in turn, was becoming his. He started to see the world through her eyes. He noticed the changing colors of the sky at sunset, the intricate patterns of frost on a window pane, the simple joy of a shared joke. The empty spaces in his life, the ones he had tried to fill with work and wealth, were being effortlessly occupied by a small girl with stormy eyes and a tattered teddy bear. One evening, as he was reviewing a particularly damning report on Thorne's illegal offshore accounts, Eliana came into his study. She was holding a piece of paper. "I drew us," she said, holding it up. It was a child's drawing. 2 stick figures with wild, scribbled hair. One was very tall, the other very small. They were holding hands. Over their heads was a giant, smiling sun. But what made Alistair's breath catch was a small detail. On the wrists of each stick figure, she had drawn a tiny, jagged red line. Their scars. She hadn't drawn them as marks of pain or trauma, but as a simple, undeniable fact of who they were, a part of their connection. He took the drawing from her, his fingers trembling slightly. "It's the best drawing I've ever seen," he said, his voice thick. "I'm going to put it in a frame, right here, on my desk, so I can see it always." He looked from the drawing to the incriminating financial data on his screen. The contrast was stark. One represented the life Thorne had tried to destroy. The other represented the tool of his revenge. In that moment, Alistair realized something profound. Revenge wasn't enough. Simply destroying Thorne, leaving him a penniless ruin, would be a hollow victory if it meant Alistair himself became as cold and ruthless as his enemy. Justice. That's what his parents would have wanted. Not just vengeance, but true, public justice. He had to expose Thorne for what he was, not just to the world of finance, but to the world. He had to honor the memory of Robert and Eleanor Finch, not with a clandestine corporate assassination, but with a clear, ringing declaration of the truth. He formulated a new plan. He would gather irrefutable proof. The arson report Harris was currently unearthing. Financial records linking Thorne to the shell corporation that paid the arsonist. Testimony from disgruntled former employees. He would build a case so airtight, so undeniable, that it would not just bankrupt Thorne, but would put him in a cage for the rest of his life. It was a longer, more difficult path. It required more patience, more finesse. But looking at the crayon drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands, Alistair knew it was the only path worth taking. The fight wasn't just for him anymore. It was for the little girl who was now curled up in his large leather office chair, fast asleep, her old bear held tight against her chest. It was for Eliana. He gently picked her up, her small body warm and trusting in his arms. As he carried her to her bed, he felt not the weight of his past, but the strength of his future. Marcus Thorne had taken his childhood. He would not allow the man to poison his second chance at having a family. The shark was still circling, but Alistair Finch was no longer just a swimmer. He was a leviathan, risen from the depths, and he was ready to protect his own. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place over the next few weeks. Harris, a genius in his field, found the arsonist. The man was living under a new name in Florida, a low-level mob enforcer who had been paid handsomely through a series of shell corporations to start a small electrical fire. He had never known the true purpose or the tragic outcome. Faced with irrefutable evidence and the choice between a life sentence for double homicide or full immunity in exchange for his testimony, he crumbled. He was ready to talk. Alistair now had the murder weapon, the motive, and the witness. He had Marcus Thorne in a cage of his own making. All he had to do was lock the door. But there was one last thing he needed to do before he handed the case over to the district attorney. He needed to see him, face to face. He arranged a meeting under the guise of discussing a potential merger, a proposal so audacious that Thorne's greed wouldn't let him refuse. They met in a private dining room at a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a name. Thorne was exactly as Alistair remembered, impeccably dressed, radiating a predatory charm. He oozed power and privilege. "Alistair," Thorne said, extending a hand. "Good to see you. I was intrigued by your proposal. Finch Enterprises and Thorne Industries. Together, we could own the world." Alistair ignored the offered hand. He sat down, his movements calm and deliberate. "I'm not here to talk about a merger, Marcus." Thorne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Oh? Then what is this about?" Alistair slid a single photograph across the polished mahogany table. It was the photo of his parents, Robert and Eleanor, smiling, happy. "I believe you knew them," Alistair said, his voice quiet, devoid of emotion. Thorne glanced at the photo, his expression unreadable. Robert Finch, of course, a tragic loss. He was a brilliant man, a terrible accident. "It wasn't an accident," Alistair said, his eyes locking with Thorne's. "It was arson. It was murder." The silence in the room was absolute. Thorne's mask of civility began to crack, a faint sheen of sweat appearing on his brow. He started to bluster. "This is an outrageous accusation. You have no—" "I have a witness," Alistair cut in, his voice like ice. "A man named Jimmy the Match Gallo. He's currently in federal protective custody, and he has a fascinating story to tell about a job he did for you 22 years ago. I also have the complete transaction history of the shell corporation that paid him, a corporation that, after a dozen clever steps, leads directly back to your personal accounts." Thorne's face went pale. The predator, for the first time, looked like prey. "What do you want?" he hissed. "Money? You can have anything." Alistair gave a short, bitter laugh. "You still think this is about money? You have no idea what this is about." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "You didn't just kill a man and his wife, Thorne. You orphaned a 5-year-old boy. You set him adrift in a world of loveless institutions. And you caused a mother to spend the rest of her life running, hiding, before she finally succumbed to grief and illness, which is what Harris's team eventually discovered had happened to my mother years after the fire. But there's one thing you didn't count on. You didn't know about the baby. The little girl you left for dead." At the mention of a girl, a flicker of genuine confusion crossed Thorne's face. He truly hadn't known. "Her name is Eliana," Alistair continued, twisting the knife, "and she's been living in my home for the past 2 months. She draws pictures. She likes stories about bunnies. She has her mother's eyes. You didn't just fail to kill me, you monster. You failed to destroy my family." He stood up, towering over the crumbling man. "I'm not going to ruin your company, Marcus. I'm not going to take your money. I'm going to take your freedom. The district attorney has the full file. I imagine you'll be hearing from them shortly. Enjoy your dinner." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Marcus Thorne sitting alone at the table, a ghost at his own feast. The smiling faces of Robert and Eleanor Finch staring up at him from the photograph. Alistair didn't feel the elation he had expected. He didn't feel triumphant. He just felt a profound sense of closure, of a heavy, centuries-old door finally swinging shut. As he stepped out into the cool night air, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Ileana, a picture she had taken with his tablet. It was a selfie of her and Barnaby, her face scrunched up in a silly grin. Beneath it, she had typed, with painstaking slowness, "Hurry home. I miss you." He smiled, a real, unburdened smile. He typed back a simple reply, "On my way." The world of Marcus Thorne, of revenge, and the ghosts of the past was already fading behind him. His future was waiting for him at home. The news of Marcus Thorne's arrest and indictment was a media firestorm. The story of the billionaire Orphan, who discovered his long-lost sister and brought his parents' killer to justice, was the stuff of legends. Alistair was hounded by reporters, but he refused all interviews, issuing a single statement through his company. This was a private family matter that has now been settled by the justice system. My sister and I request that our privacy be respected as we continue to heal. They did heal. They did it together. They visited their parents' graves for the first time, placing yellow roses, their mother's favorite, on the simple stone marker. Alistair told them all about Ileana, how she was safe and happy, and so incredibly smart. Ileana, in turn, told them about Barnaby and how she was learning to play the piano. It wasn't a sad occasion. It was a reunion. A year later, the penthouse was no longer a sterile showcase of wealth. It was a home, a messy, vibrant, happy home. Crayon drawings were taped to the refrigerator. A half-finished Lego castle sat in the middle of the living room floor. The faint, melodic sounds of a slightly out-of-tune piano often drifted down the halls. Alistair had found a new balance in his life. He still ran his empire, but he did it with a renewed sense of purpose. He established the Finch Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to reforming the foster care system and supporting orphans, with an initial endowment that made it one of the largest in the world. He wasn't just building a legacy of wealth anymore. He was building a legacy of hope. One crisp autumn afternoon, he found Ileana in her favorite spot, the window seat in the library, looking out over the park. She was 8 years old now, her face having lost some of its childish roundness, her stormy eyes bright with intelligence and confidence. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting in his usual armchair. She pointed to a family on the path below, a mother, a father, a little boy, and a little girl. "I was thinking," she said, her voice thoughtful, "that we're kind of like them, a family." Alistair smiled. "Yeah, Ellie, we are." He looked at his sister, this incredible, resilient girl, who had survived the unthinkable and had, in turn, saved him from his own gilded cage. The scars on their wrists were still there, faint silvery reminders of the fire that had almost destroyed them. But they were no longer marks of trauma. They were a testament to their survival, a symbol of a bond that could never be broken. They were the Finch family, reforged in the ashes, stronger and more whole than ever before. The lonely billionaire and the lost orphan were gone. In their place stood a brother and a sister, and they were finally, truly home.